So it begins.
Are you impressed by what she did?
I am.
Let's get that. Then it goes.
Ew, Charles, don't do that. Ew. Shoving a habanero jelly bean up your nose is not the most intelligent thing.
Die! 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 That's how it's done. Can somebody clip that? Full health. So, I think that you should be able to negotiate with this guy. Step 1, find out what the mutant scorpion wants. So take that. I push the buttons.
Give me some truth now. Whose side are we on? Whatever you say.
Bill, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate you coming by and talking with us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on, man. I really appreciate it.
Definitely. I've had a chance to look over some of your content as I kind of got to know one of our previous guests, Josh, a little bit better. And I got to say, I'm really a fan of your model.
Oh, thank you. What exactly do you mean my model?
So I guess the way that you could describe it was when you kind of hop onto your channel, the trailer that you have really lays it out in a very clear way. And so much as kind of like the schedule that you're doing, the way that you record live, compress it or repost it over to YouTube, and then do a compressed editing to then pull it off to your podcast. And you managed to keep the podcast a consistent roughly 25 to 30 minutes with the occasional 1 hour explainer kind of being thrown in. Is that that about right?
My goal, I never meet my goal. My goal is to keep the podcast at 20 minutes because we were talking a little bit before the show and I mentioned I'm a big nerd about this stuff. And I was reading research that said that most commutes in the US, which is, my biggest market probably, most commutes in the US are 20 minutes or 40 minutes. So if you keep your podcast to about that length, then people are more likely to listen to the entire thing. So that's kind of why I went with that. I know most podcasts go with much, much longer. But my goal is to get it down to 20 minutes, and that almost never happens. It's like once in a blue moon, I'll be able to get it down to that. I just wanted it to be bite-sized and digestible.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I like that you use the data from as your target audience's behavior while they should be listening to your product to determine the time frame. That's pretty smart. I haven't heard too many people reference that before. How did you stumble across that concept?
There was a podcast called, it's called the Podcast Method. And that's with Dan Benjamin. He's the guy that founded 5x5. So like pretty big in the podcasting world. And he mentioned it, and it always just kind of stuck with me. And, every time I consume a little bit of information, it stays rattling around in there until it can be used later. And so I decided to use it later.
Nice. Well, I like the way that you collected that data from. That's an interesting idea. Well, before we get too far into this, I know a lot of our guests watching right now maybe don't know who you are exactly. So if you could give us a little brief intro about who you are, your name, and kind of what you do, that'd be pretty
All
good.
right. Sure, that's easy enough. My name's Bill. I am the host, the solo host of Nintendo Switchcraft. It is a 3 times a week podcast about Nintendo, just basically what's going on with Nintendo. It comes out on Tuesdays and Thursdays and Saturdays are the days that I try and bring the show out. I record it live, and we can talk about that later if you like. But I also have a second podcast that I recently started called 78 Degrees, which is I have a co-host named Richard, and we just kind of talk about whatever we feel like, because we don't only want to talk about games all the time, although like we're both huge video game fans, as I'm sure you can tell by all the garbage that I've got behind me, all of my collection stuff. But you can find my stuff over at RunJumpStomp.com. And 3 days a week, Nintendo Switchcraft, 1 day a week, 78 Degrees.
So I saw that your posting schedule seems to be pretty consistent during the week, and then you kind of given yourself leeway on the weekend as far as posting structure. That seems really organic. How did you? I know a lot of people say that consistency is key. How did you decide that?
Well, during the week is like I record live over at my Twitch page, twitch.tv/RunJumpStomp for a little plug there. But I record live, and that's when I get home from work. So I get home from work, I sit down, and like I said earlier, I try and keep the show to be as short as possible. So being able to knock it out right after I get home from work really isn't too bad, and that leaves the rest of the evening open for the myriad of other things that I have to accomplish. Excuse me, sorry. Then on Saturday, I never know when I'm going to have the free time. I know that sometime during the day I'll be able to work it in, but I'm married. I've got 3 kids here in the house. Well, one of them's off to college now, so she's not really in the house, although she's home right now for Columbus Day weekend. And mostly when I started it, my son was in soccer, and soccer was on Saturdays, and the practice was a bunch of different days. So I remember once I was recording it and I was talking to the people who watch live, and I said, Switchcraft is recorded live on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then I stopped and I was like, I want to say what time it's recorded, but I don't know what to say about Saturday because I never know when Saturday is going to happen. And one of the chatters said, well, why don't you just say whenever you get around to it? And I said, okay, that works for me. Because, while I do have dedicated listeners that show up and watch me record it live every single time, which is insane to me that anybody would show up to listen to me talk about something.
How humble.
Yeah, well, the episodes always come out on the same day, and as long as they come out on the same day, I think it's okay if the time varies.
No, I think I'm with you. We do a very similar model here. We don't record live like you do. I've found it's difficult to guarantee live recordings just because of the inconsistencies in schedules, and gamers typically have a huge variety of schedules. So
yeah,
how have you managed to allow that to stay consistent in your recording? Do you rely? I know sometimes you do interviews, or do you have like a certain time when you do them just to make sure?
No, I don't. So the way that it works, and it's certainly easier for me than it is for most other people because I don't have a co-host that I have to work out scheduling with. That's always a real pain, especially when it comes to time zones, figuring out, oh, well, I thought it was this time. Well, daylight savings time just happened. Well, it hasn't happened for us yet because we're over there. So like all that always throws a wrench into the works. Because I don't have a co-host, I don't have to worry about that. So I can just record whenever I want. Now, there has been times when I've done interviews, and most of the time, the interviews have not been done live. Most of the time, the interviews are done just at some off time, and then I publish the episode either like as a bonus episode or as luck would have it, there's been a couple times where I have had to go out of town for work. And I just happened to record an interview that week, and I could drop the file in as like Saturday's episode because I had to go out of town for work or whatever. So interviewing live is great, but it's really difficult. And when you're asking somebody to come on your show and to like, I feel like it's best to just say, all right, I'm going to do it when you can do it, and I'll make it work. Of course, with restrictions, because we've all have jobs and things like that.
No, I found it to be a very similar experience for us. That with the varying streaming schedules and sleeping patterns that get created from these varying schedules, it really is just easier to kind of be flexible in your interviewing process, and then hopefully you can stockpile enough content where your release schedule is effective.
Yeah, I don't get to stockpile content though. That's something that I wanted to do, but I can't because my show is really kind of a news show. So like every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, we talk about what's Nintendo up to right now, or what game has just come out, or whatever it happens to be. So I can't stockpile episodes. I've kind of tried to think of the type of show that I could do where it would allow me to do something like that, where I could have like maybe 10 or 15 episodes just sitting there on my hard drive waiting for me. And then I could keep working on getting the other stuff done. And I haven't nailed anything like that down yet, but it's definitely something that I would be interested in doing, just because it would give me a little more freedom as to when I record. Because recording live, there's an audience there waiting for me. And I feel like if I don't show up at the time that they're expecting me, that I'm letting them down. And that's happened a couple times due to internet difficulties or things like that. But I also think at the same time, it keeps me honest. If I wasn't recording live, I would probably say, well, I'll record later. And then something would come up and distract me. And then it'd be too late. And I'd be like, oh man, I didn't get an episode out today. But knowing that at 3 p.m. on Tuesday and Thursday, I know that there's going to be people in the chat waiting for me to show up. That really motivates me to make sure that I make it happen.
No, I can see how that accountability could kind of reinforce that schedule. And I'm hoping to find something similar for ourselves as we slowly generate the consistent audience like you have. You said that you're trying to find that ability to stockpile content, and you're working on these kind of examples that you can do in order to do it. Was the NES archive something like that?
That is actually 100% what it was. For if somebody hasn't seen it, the NES archive was a YouTube series that I was trying to do. 25
episodes. I think you did it.
Well, my goal was to do a lot more. And it's not that it's dead. Video editing. Well, I guess let me talk about what it was. It was basically I was going to research the background of an NES game. My goal was, of course, to do all of the games for the NES. But I was going to research the background of an NES game, come up with a few quick things about it, find out who made it, what other games they worked on, who made the music for it, what were the reviews when the game came out, what was, play it myself and give my impressions of it. And that was going to be a YouTube series. And the reason why I decided to do a YouTube series with it was because I figured this is evergreen content that even if somebody just finds it 3 years from now and then they look at it, they'll say, oh, well, I can watch these. Whereas if they look at, because I record my Switchcraft, I record that and then I push the video up to YouTube. If somebody finds that in 2 years, they're going to be like, well, who cares? I don't really care about that. That's not relevant anymore because it's a news show, and news shows don't last like that. Whereas the NES archive, it would last. So yes, it was a deliberate thought to do that. Was exactly what I was going for. And video editing just takes way too much time. The amount of time that I had to put in to spit out a 10-minute video on a 10-yard fight for the NES was too much, and other things were falling by the wayside. So I ended up canceling, or not really canceling, the video series. I just kind of let it die. And that is something that I am planning to bring back as a podcast, but just an audio podcast, because that takes a lot less time for like editing it for me for audio. And we can talk about my process for this later if you want. It takes a lot less time.
Yeah, I would like to talk about that in a little bit. I actually am curious as to why you decided to do a YouTube series versus a Twitch live play, because of the video editing requirements that I hear, especially from a lot of people that still juggle multiple responsibilities throughout their day. The editing labor and to cost ratio, or like potential return on YouTube, just isn't the same as it was 3 to 5 years ago. Making Twitch probably the better choice. Is your decisions really coming down to the time that it's editing? Have you looked as far as the profitability of each position, or are you really just looking at what does best on each platform as far as viewership, or what's your process?
Well, as far as the money goes, I certainly do not do what I do for the money. Like the amount of money that I make at what I do, it lets me buy a game or two. But for the most part, like doing what I do is an expensive hobby. Well, maybe not too expensive, but it was expensive up front. Now that I've got the equipment and stuff, the continuing expense really isn't all that bad, but I don't really make much money doing this. That's not to say that you shouldn't do that. And that's not to say that people who want to get into podcasting because they want to make money. No, that's not a wrong thing to do. And it's not that I don't want to make money. It's just that's not really the goal. I don't really know exactly what my goal was, but I just wanted to talk about video games because I'm a big damn nerd. And my whole life people have said, boy, you should be on the radio, blah, 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 because I've got this a voice for radio, and I've got a face for radio too. You know,
Well, if you're born to be the radio guy, you might as well give it a shot, right?
there you go. I figured I may as well. I've got the voice for radio, so I can give it a shot. And for some reason, right place, right time, Switchcraft just kind of took off. Looking at YouTube versus Twitch as far as, you know, profitability, that never enters into the equation. I might make YouTube, I probably have made a total of $10 in the 3 or 4 years that I've been doing it.
Wow.
So
how many videos do you have on YouTube at this point? Because you've posted all of your Twitch content over there, right?
Yeah, well, not all of my Twitch content, but all of the podcast content. Anything that anytime that I recorded live, well, that's not true either. I've posted most of the podcast content over there, and that's more because Twitch deletes it. So, like, if you don't know how Twitch works, basically you record live, and then the video that you have there stays around for a while, but after so long, unless you're a partner, they just delete it. And somebody, like, this is very early on, one of my earliest viewers had reached out to me, and they're like, hey, I heard that you had done such and such in some game. I can't even remember what the game was. And I was like, oh, yeah, it was really fun. It's too bad you missed it. And they were like, well, I went to watch it, and it was gone. And I was like, oh. So then I looked, and that's when I found out that they deleted stuff. And then I saw that there was just an export to YouTube button. So I started doing that with just about everything, just exporting everything. But then I would look at YouTube and I'd be like, nobody is watching this. And I realized, like, people don't watch for the most part. I'm sure that there's outliers out there, and they're furiously typing at their keyboards right now. But most people don't go back and watch old live shows. I think for the most part, people prefer to watch live shows when it's live and watch stuff that is curated and created with specificity later on after the fact. Because all of my videos where, like, I would sit down and play Guild Wars 2 for 4 hours or something. And, you know, maybe I was talking to people in chat and we were having fun or whatever. And then I would hit the button to export to YouTube, and that might get a view, like one. And it just seemed like kind of wasted effort. And also, I could be totally wrong about this, but one thing that I worried about when I was thinking about how YouTube surfaces content to, you know, Joe Schmo who's going to watch it. Like, I thought maybe YouTube looks at it, and this 4-hour video that I posted only got, like, I don't know, 100 minutes of view time, because it was this huge thing and people only watched a small portion of it because it's so huge. And maybe they would rank that as like, oh, this video is not as good because people watched a lower percentage of it. So I stopped posting my old live streams to YouTube after a while. I'm sorry, I forgot the question.
No, I think we were kind of just talking about the differences between YouTube and Twitch and choosing which platform to kind of put your contents, and a little bit more the differences and the reasons behind why you're doing it. You kind of told me a little bit about the profitability. Wasn't as much of a focus, and you kind of went on to tell me about the reasons why you were kind of guiding the type of content that you're putting on YouTube, mainly because the live recordings, Twitch recordings on YouTube itself wasn't really doing that well. So you've been adapting your approach.
Yeah, I've definitely been adapting my approach as time has gone on. I also, like, when YouTube gaming first came out, I had a serious case of the grass is greener all the time. I could not decide where I wanted to go. And I think in the end, that really hurt my growth as a content creator, because, like, I was streaming on Twitch and YouTube gaming came out, and I was like, well, nobody's watching me on Twitch. I'm going to try YouTube gaming. So I stopped streaming on Twitch and tried YouTube gaming. And, you know, maybe a couple people would come by and I'd think, oh man, this is really great. It's working, you know, but then I would look at Twitch and I'd be like, man, look at how many people are watching this game over there. And look at how many people are watching this game on YouTube. And it's like a ridiculously low number on YouTube. So I thought there's more eyeballs over there. So I'll go over to Twitch again. So I'd go over to Twitch, and then I'd look back at YouTube and I'd say, there's no competition there. There's so many more people on Twitch that it's like finding a needle in a haystack. Nobody's going to find my content there. So I'd go back over to YouTube Gaming, and I kept bouncing back and forth. And finally, I kind of got my break. And it just so happened that it happened when I was on Twitch. And, you know, I finally started to get an audience. And that's really thanks to another streamer who, it was really a random event that happened. Literally, it was random. There was a streamer that I was watching who, if you haven't reached out to them, you should, because he's awesome. And that's Bog Otter. Bogotter. And if you haven't watched his stuff, you should watch it. He's really entertaining and streams like every day. That's his full-time job. And I was watching one of his streams, excuse me, and he was doing a giveaway that another viewer had sponsored. They had basically said, look, I'll do a giveaway, Bogotter, and I will give whoever wins the money to subscribe to your channel. Like now these days on Twitch, you can just gift somebody a sub, but back then you couldn't. And I was watching and I was like, well, whatever, I'll enter. So I entered and I won. And AKCSL, who's also a streamer, he sent me over the $5 or whatever, and I subscribed to Bogotter. And then later on that day, Bog was having a he was playing Overwatch, I think, and he was playing Overwatch, and he was playing it with subs, and I was like, oh, I'm a sub now. So I jumped in and I hopped in his Discord and I said hello, and when he heard my voice, and it's kind of got a deep timbre to it, he said, oh my God, are you going to sell us barbecue sauce or something like that? You should be on the radio. And I said, oh, funny you should mention that. I have a podcast, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, well, everybody go check out his stuff. And a bunch of people came over. Cool. And like once I had that, then people started showing up. So it's all about being in the right place at the right time, I think.
No, I absolutely agree. This is fortunately, I think, our 14th podcast at this point, and I'm starting to hear some consistencies across the people that we're interviewing. And a majority of them have a similar story, where they were playing, actually one other person, Kat Conti, she actually had almost an identical story to yours, where she was stumbling through streams looking for people to watch, found somebody that was entertaining, who was partnered, and they were doing an on-stream giveaway. She won and ended up getting a conversation open with the person who was running the stream, in your case the sub, and then that led to a reference on stream that kind of, I wouldn't say, it started sharing communities. You know, the community took interest at that point. So it's kind of funny that you stumbled into that exact same model as well. It seems to be the foundation as far as how people transfer communities and audiences here on Twitch, it seems.
Yeah, that's one thing that Twitch has over YouTube, 1,000%, is just the ability to raid somebody or host somebody. And yeah, if you're like, I've seen people do it on YouTube Gaming where they're like, all right, everybody, I'm done. I'm going to post a link in chat. Go watch them. But being able to type /host or /raid and send your audience over to that other person really is fantastic. Not just for the streamers, because it's definitely fantastic for the streamers, because I've been streaming and had like one of my favorite streamers host me, Aurora Peachy, and like she brought 400 people with her, and I was like, oh my God, this is insane. That was like fantastic. Thank you so much. But it's not just good for the streamer, it's also amazing for the audience, because you know, people get into a rut and they watch the same thing all the time, and they're sitting there, and then you know, I've been watching streams and had somebody host somebody and then sat there and be like, wow, this is a great content creator that I've never seen before, and I never would have found them if it weren't for this host or this raid. And YouTube Gaming doesn't have anything like that to make it organic and easy, and they don't have stream teams and things like that. And I feel like there's so much that YouTube Gaming could learn from Twitch. And at the same time, Twitch could learn a lot from YouTube as well. Like the fact that YouTube gives transcoding to every single person who's streaming is massive and huge, because that means I can put out the highest possible quality content. But if your internet is garbage, you still get to watch because of transcoding. That is something that is massively successful over on YouTube. On Twitch, you know, I'll start up a stream and I'll be told, well, Bill, you don't have transcoding today. And I'll be like, oh, I'm sorry, guys. There's nothing really I can do about it other than try and restart the stream. And I don't want to do that in the middle of things. So, you know, shrug. The same thing with the videos. Like, Twitch should just keep the videos. It's Amazon. They have piles and piles of money, and there's no reason that they shouldn't just look at what YouTube's doing and copy them. And there's no reason that YouTube shouldn't just look at what Twitch is doing and copy it. Because I think in the end, everybody would be better off if they did.
I mean, there's a lot behind that as well. I think a lot of the platforms are in a race to the middle, right? Where everyone's just kind of imitating each other. I mean, YouTube gaming had to be a direct reaction to Twitch. There's no doubt about it.
Without a doubt. Yeah, because Google tried to buy Twitch and then Amazon beat them to the punch.
That was a really good snipe, wasn't it?
It was.
What was it though? But even so, what you're saying about as far as the community, the way that the platforms are interacting with or allowing the streamers and content creators to interact with one another is structurally different. I feel like I've heard from some of my previous guests, particularly the last one who had about 10 years experience on YouTube particularly. And he told me a little bit of a story, which I don't know if you could agree. How long have you been creating content now? 3 years? 4 years?
About 3 years, I think. But
in the beginning, though, he said that there was typically a community on YouTube which is a little bit more open, and a sense of collaboration was more involved. But it wasn't until profitability, or YouTube got really profitable and money started flowing to the table, that the walls kind of went up and people stopped working together. But there was never really a kind of a structural integration of this collaboration. And that's kind of where Twitch came about, was a little bit of this structural integration of collaborate, or the concepts of that community is kind of why it was created in the first place. So the fact that they're the ones who can host and they're the ones who have these features is pretty telling. But also the transcoding, it makes sense because YouTube is basically just supposed to be good, highly edited content. So variable video sounds like something that they would do, while Twitch being streaming and live and keeping it topical. You can kind of see why they would lean to these sides, but you're right. They're throwing away content, literally. Just hitting
I agree. I don't know personally if I disagree or agree with what your previous guest said, just because I haven't been in the game nearly as long as they have. But it does feel like YouTube is a bunch of silos and Twitch is an open field.
Now, that again, yeah, that corroborates. I think you're right, though, just adding that hosting kind of YouTube gaming, which didn't YouTube gaming basically shut down about 3 weeks ago?
Well, they basically switched their URL, and I do see, like, the one thing that I noticed is, because it used to be gaming.youtube.com and now it's youtube.com/gaming, and I don't know why they would bother making that distinction, but whatever.
SEO.
But the thing that they've done that is, I think, very good for YouTube gaming, because it hasn't shut down, is if I sit down at YouTube and I type in a game, let's say I type in Monster Hunter, on the right hand side, it allows me to subscribe to that game instead of just subscribing to a content creator who makes that stuff for that game. I can subscribe to that game, and now I can see stuff from a bunch of content creators that are making stuff that play that game, live stuff right next to other videos. And by surfacing that in the YouTube area itself, instead of kind of walling it off as YouTube gaming separately, I think that in the long run, it's going to help live streaming a lot more, because people will go to look at Mario Party or whatever, and they'll click on that, and then they'll see 3 or 4 people are live streaming this game right now, and they might be like, oh, maybe I'll check it out. Whereas before, if you wanted to see that, you would have to search for Mario Party and then maybe type live after it, or you had to know to go to gaming.youtube.com. And it was just really kind of clunky before. YouTube made a lot of weird choices when it came to YouTube gaming.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's owned by Google, which basically makes money only in search engines. So everything else they do basically doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's glad that they have the money to keep it going and eventually figure it out, though. Just like IBM. That's interesting, though, that they would allow you to follow the game itself versus the person. I mean, clearly you still can do both. Do you think that's going to impact the independent celebrity of streamers and the ability for them to collect their own audiences? Because in essence, that kind of creates TV channels out of games, while instead of it having a TV channel that is just that content creator.
I think that in the end, I think this is going to help smaller streamers or content creators more because, like, let's just use myself for an example. You don't know to go to YouTube and search for RunJumpStomp. You have no idea who I am. Nobody does. I'm like a tiny little cog in the wheel. But if I happen to be playing Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild on my Switch and I'm live streaming it or posting video content about it, and you follow that game because it's like your favorite game, and you go and you click on that, and then bam, you're going to see my video right there. Because maybe you'll even get an email that says, look, you subscribe to Legend of Zelda. Here's a bunch of content creators that put a bunch of Zelda stuff out today, or who are live streaming Zelda today. And I think that that's going to raise up all of the smaller streamers who wouldn't be found otherwise because of the whole needle in a haystack problem that YouTube kind of has.
No, it does kind of adopt some of the Twitch filters as far as game types down a little bit further. I can see how that would prove, but still, you've kind of been bouncing between Twitch and YouTube gaming. Are you still running on YouTube gaming, or have you kind of given that up entirely for Twitch?
I gave that up at least over a year ago. I gave it. I stopped going to YouTube gaming once I found an audience on Twitch, and if I had stayed in one place for long enough, I probably would have found an audience sooner. But once I knew that, hey, if I turn on the stream, there's going to be 10 or so people that are going to show up. That's all that I wanted. The main reason that I started streaming, and podcasting is a completely different reason, but the whole reason that I started streaming video games, which I don't really get to do anymore because the podcasting has become more popular for me. But the whole reason I started streaming was because I had played a ridiculous amount of MMO games, which are all like, every time you play an MMO game, you have people to talk to. So I would be like talking to my friends in the game, and, you know, we'd be in TeamSpeak or whatever. But I felt like I was missing out on a lot of really cool single player games. And every time I tried one, I would be a little bored because I didn't have somebody to talk to while I was doing it. So I thought, if I stream, then maybe an audience member will show up and I'll have somebody to talk to while I'm playing this single player game, and I'll get to not miss out on all of this cool single player content. So it really came out of the fact that MMOs had spoiled me for being able to talk to people all the time when I played a game, so much that playing a single player game felt like a solitary experience that I didn't enjoy as much. So that's why I started streaming on Twitch. And I think, you know, the rest is history, I guess.
Yeah, I actually would like to go back into that history real quick. First off, I love the reasoning why you joined Twitch. You did it in I think the purest reasoning for Twitch to exist. You just wanted people to play with, or people to kind of hang out with you while you play. I think that is the core of Twitch itself. So I'm just tickled that that's the reasoning why you're there. But let's go back a little bit. We kind of jumped into it. There's so many interesting things to talk about with your content creation experience, but we kind of skipped over some of my first questions that we typically ask about kind of where you got started on this journey. Typically, we like to say, when was the first, or when did you get into gaming? When was the first game that you've played?
The first game that I ever played,
yeah,
and I remember this distinctly, my grandmother either owned or worked in a bar. I can't remember which.
Okay.
And I really should ask my mom about this, but I don't remember. I always forget to ask her. And on the summer or in the summertime, my grandmother worked the day shift of the bar, basically. So, you know, there'd be like two barflies in the bar sitting there talking about whatever and drinking their beers. And my mom would, you know, I wasn't in school, so my mom would want to go visit her mom, and she would bring me with her. And in that bar, so there was the bar area, and then there was like a little wall with a doorway on either side. And on the other side of that, there was a pool table and a shuffleboard table and a Donkey Kong machine. And my grandmother would open up the cash register and just give me a fistful of quarters. And I would just, you know, she would just sit there talking to my mom, and, you know, she'd grab me some Dipsy Doodles, or, which, if you don't know what those are like the generic version of Fritos, I guess. And, you know, maybe a Pepsi in a glass bottle. Remember those? Oh my God. So I'd have a Pepsi in a glass bottle, my bag of Dipsy Doodle, a handful of quarters, and I would go over into the room. And I had the pool table, the shuffleboard, and the Donkey Kong machine all to myself, because it's the middle of the day and everybody who would go there was at work. Yeah. And so I would just sit there and play Donkey Kong and pool and shuffleboard all day long. And at the end of her shift, she would just go over to those machines, get the money back out, and put it back in the register.
Free games for life. I love it.
Yeah, Donkey Kong. I loved Donkey Kong when I was a kid. I was never very good at it, but I kept playing it.
It's kind of funny, the verbiage that you chose. Did you ever watch the docu-series King of Kong, A Fistful of Quarters?
Yes, I did. That is such a great movie. God, I hate Billy Mitchell.
I saw that movie like a decade ago too, and when Billy Mitchell's recent resurfacing, and he's like, "Oh, he actually was a fraud." I was like, "Steve Levy deserved it all." You know?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of Billy Mitchell. The guy is so full of himself.
Yeah, his arrogance knew no bounds. I mean, and he grew up to be rather successful independently. You know, all excuses. I mean, he owned his own restaurant, kind of deal, right? So he did well. I don't know why you had to cheat and lie and ride something from 30 years ago.
People hold on to the past really, really tight.
It was the heyday, right?
Yeah.
He was basically like the world's most important gamer there for a little bit. That's kind of
and
cool.
In his mind, I think he still is.
Yeah, I bet you to this day he's just like, I was the ninja of the, you know.
Yeah,
I can definitely see that being the case. So, how did all of out of these experiences, which do you think shaped you most into who you are today, as far as the gaming is concerned? Like,
God, I remember when I was a kid. We lived across. I lived on across the street from a golf course. And my friends and I would go into the woods and we would look for golf balls. And then we would take them to the pro shop and sell them back in order to save up enough money to buy an Atari 2600. And I think that's where I really got hooked. I played so much Atari 2600. Like, my friends and I would play River Raid for hours. Like, when I was playing Donkey Kong as a little kid, I was probably too young to really get good. But with River Raid and Keystone Capers and, you know, those games on the 2600, like, I had so much fun with those. And playing, like, and then when I got my Nintendo, I was always late to the party. Like, I think the NES was out by the time I could afford. Well, maybe not out. I bet you it was probably 1982 or so. So the NES wouldn't be out for another 3 years. But the Atari 2600 was out for quite a long time before I got one. The same thing happened with the NES. And I also remember going up to the local department store and playing the Super Nintendo in the electronics department until they would chase us out of there, me and my friends. But like, I've played games my entire life, and I cannot imagine not playing video games. Like, I can't imagine a time when I'll be like, yeah, I've had enough. I'm not going to play games anymore, because every chance that I get, whether it's sitting down by myself or sitting down with my kids, or playing Dr. Mario against my wife and losing very badly, No matter what it is, it's always fun every single time. And I don't understand how anybody could say, you know what, I don't feel like having any fun today. So I just love playing video games.
So out of this love for the game, after decades of playing, what finally made you decide to want to start your own podcast about gaming?
There's a couple reasons. I always get excited to talk about stuff. That's one thing. I always get excited to talk about stuff. I remember this one time I was in college, and at the time I was playing EverQuest, which if you haven't played, it's an MMO.
I played it. And
back in the day, I was a smoker and a drinker and all that stuff. And we were out having a cigarette break between classes, and somebody had mentioned that they like video games or something. I said, well, what have you been playing? And they said, oh, I've been playing this. And I said, you should try out EverQuest. And I was describing EverQuest to them. And every time I talk about a game that I'm having fun with, I get excited and animated, and it's just like, it's really exciting and fun to try and convince people to try something new. It's interesting to me to look at what the players in the video game industry are doing, and maybe not say analyze it, but to throw in my 2 cents. And I always kind of liked doing that. Back in, I don't remember when, but there was before G4. There was you know G4, right?
Mm-hmm.
G4 TV.
Oh yeah. That's
okay.
The first time I saw E3 and CES and all that jazz.
Right. Before that was around, there was a show called there was a show called Game Time, I think it was. And this is back in the days of dial-up. Now, I just happened to work at an internet company at the time, so we had really, really good internet. And this was a video show on the internet in the days of dial-up, which is just bonkers. Of course, they went out of business. It was with Pseudo Networks. And the hosts, like, they were always sitting there talking about games, and I always thought to myself, I can do that. And when Pseudo went out of business, one of the hosts, Scott Rubin, started up another show. This time it was an audio show, and it was live, and it was called The Unnamed Show, or maybe it was called All Games. I can't really remember the details. But he would record the show live, and we would hang out in IRC and talk to them about it. And one day he asked me if I wanted to record a segment. So I said, sure. Can I record a thing about RPG games? Because at the time I was really into playing RPG games. And he said, sure. So I would go home, and I had like this crappy microphone, like came with my Hewlett Packard computer or whatever. And like I would sat down, I would go and look out for the RPG news, and I would record like a little 5-minute or 10-minute segment, and I would send him the MP3. And in the middle of his show, he would put that. And I remember I was out at a bar with some friends, and I said, guys, I got to go. I'm going to go home and listen to my show live, because I want to see what people are saying in the chat room when it happens. And like, I was so excited. My friends were like, man, what a nerd. But I was excited for it. So, you know, I got in the car, I went home, I sat down. Scott was doing his part of the show, and then he played Arcatan, and that's what my handle used to be before I came up with RunJumpStomp. Arcatan's RPG news. He played it, and like, people were like, "Oh, great job, Arcatan, great job!" And I was like, "Oh, thanks." And I was like, "Man, if only I could do what he's doing." And then I didn't do it. I just didn't do anything about it for years and years and years. And then I decided I was going to do a podcast. So I made a podcast. It was RunJumpStomp. It started out as Arcatan's Arcade, by the way, but nobody can ever pronounce Arcatan, and nobody could spell Arcatan. So I thought nobody's going to remember or be able to find it. So I went with RunJumpStomp, the 3 things that Mario does. So I went with RunJumpStomp, and I started recording that podcast. And, you know, at its best, I think that show had like maybe 25 downloads per episode, which is tiny. It's like abysmal. But I was excited because look at that. There's 25 people that were tuning in to listen to me, which is insane. So I guess I just always wanted to do that kind of thing. I mean, when I was a kid, I used to sit there when I was listening to music on my Walkman, and I would stop it between songs, and I'd be like, thanks for listening to WKRP. Now coming up next is Huey Lewis in the News, Born to Rock and Roll or whatever. And then I'd hit play, and I don't know why my mom suffered that nonsense, but she did. She didn't tell me to shut up, which she probably should have because it was annoying.
That's a fun little quirk. Yeah, you were kind of destined to be that radio host then, weren't you?
I like one of my heroes was Adrian Cronauer, which I like, not the real Adrian Cronauer, but Robin Williams. I had the soundtrack to Good Morning Vietnam, and I used to listen to that. And in the soundtrack, between the songs, you get to hear Robin Williams doing like his stuff. And to this day, I could still recite most of that tape because I listened to it over and over. And I would just go outside and shoot the basketball over and over, and I would just sit there and talk along with Robin Williams as he was playing Adrian Cronauer. I just always wanted to be on the radio. Mm-hmm. And I didn't even know it.
Well, podcasting is definitely the current radio, right? And you've created 264 episodes so far of RunJumpStomp.
No, of Switchcraft.
Of Switchcraft. My apologies.
That's apologies.
Okay. Yeah, so you're still running under RunJumpStomp, but Switchcraft is technically the name of it. How many episodes did you actually produce with RunJumpStomp?
I don't know. I think it was less than 100. And that just never caught on. I did have a co-host after a while. I did it on my own for the most part. And then I ended up bringing on a co-host, nothing against my co-host, because he's my co-host on 78 Degrees. Mm. But I just felt like it was way more work than it needed to be. And especially because Switchcraft was doing so well, I wanted to really focus on Switchcraft and help make that grow. So we killed off RunJumpStomp, but I didn't want to go out and buy another domain. So I just used that domain for Switchcraft. But there were less than 100 episodes.
So tell me a little bit more about Switchcraft then. It seems to have taken off to a point where it cannibalized your crew, i.e. you and your co-host and all your time. And it became your priority. Tell me about that story, about kind of creating Switchcraft and it taking off, or go into some detail there for me.
Well, Nintendo in October of 2016, they unveiled the Nintendo Switch. And I've always been a big fan of Nintendo. I mean, my first game that I ever played was Donkey Kong. I've owned every Nintendo system with the exception of the Virtual Boy, which luckily my collection, I now have it in my collection.
I had one too. Yeah, this thing's garbage. It's so cool.
It's really cool, but man, not fun.
Yeah, I had a Wario, I think, for it.
So, I have the tennis game.
Ah, cool.
Mario Tennis. So I always was a big fan of Nintendo because they always focus more on fun than having a higher number than somebody else. So I was really excited for whatever Nintendo was going to do with the NX, which was what it was called before it was called the Switch. And when Nintendo showed us what it was in that first video with, Karen on the rooftop and that guy walking his dog, I was like, wow, this is going to be huge. This is going to be absolutely huge. I think I want to do a podcast just about Nintendo because I think that this is going to blow up and I'm excited about it. And they called it the Switch. And I thought, it's kind of like some kind of witchcraft, Switchcraft. So that's where I came up with the name. And that show started out heavily. It was just me. It was very, very heavily scripted. So I thought to myself, I'm going to sit down, write a script, record the script, post it once a week. And that lasted for about 8 weeks. And after 8 weeks, so probably around January, I was like, nope, this isn't working. I'm bad at writing scripts. I'm not doing a very good job. Things would come up and I'd be like, I don't know if I have anything to talk about this week, mostly because I wanted to avoid writing. So I kind of let it fall by the wayside. And then when the Switch finally came out, I was really excited, and I live streamed my opening the box and plugging it in and jumping into Breath of the Wild for the first time. And it was so much fun. I got really excited and I wanted to talk about it. But the next episode of Run Jump Stomp was a little bit of ways. So I thought, well, maybe I'll just do Switchcraft again. And I sat down and I started writing a script, and I said, you know what? No, you suck at writing scripts. Stop this. Do what you're good at. Just hit record and start talking. And as you've been listening to this show, you have probably realized that, my God, Bill can talk for a really long time.
Good talker, definitely. You get the
Yeah,
gift of gab.
What's that?
You have the gift of gab, sir.
Yes, I can just keep going. So I decided that Switchcraft was going to be and I don't know why I picked it. Well, actually, I do have a reason for picking it this way. I decided it's going to be 3 days a week. The reason for that was I hated it when there was a show that I really liked listening to, and whatever their content was, whatever that show was, if something big would happen right after they posted an episode, now I got to wait a week to find out what they think of it. I hated waiting. So I thought, you know what? Maybe people will like it if the show comes out multiple times a week. That way, if I record on Tuesday and Nintendo drops some crazy info on Wednesday and I'm recording again on Thursday, people are always getting up to the date information. So I'll make the show short and have it be 3 days a week. That was my goal. So that's how Switchcraft kind of came about. So I sat down and I said, basically, I think the episode, it was called episode 9, Where Has Switchcraft Been, or something like that. I said, my goal is to have 3 episodes a week, every single week, without fail. And with very few exception, I have been able to maintain that. The only exceptions have been like Christmas time. And for Christmas time, what I've done so far was I record a huge episode and just, maybe like an hour and a half or so, and drop that in so that people can listen to that. That's 3 episodes worth of content there. And I think it's gone pretty well.
You said originally that on Run Jump Stomp was only 25 downloads per episode, and it was abysmally small. What, by comparison, if you feel comfortable sharing, how's Switchcraft performing?
Switchcraft gets around 50,000 a month.
Whoa, that is not small at all, sir.
Yeah, I'm like, it's insane to me. Like, I can't understand that there are 50,000 downloads of that show every month. That's crazy. But it's fun. It's fun, and it's always nice to see those numbers go up. But I would probably still be doing it even if I only had 100 people listening or so, because it's fun to talk about, and I just get to talk to the people in chat every time that I record, and that's really fun.
No, from what I've heard from your stories so far, I 100% believe you that you would do it with or without the viewership. But I'm so happy that you've been finally rewarded with this huge viewership. That's remarkable. So that means that we've been talking so much today about Twitch and YouTube and your experiences content creating there, but the lion's share of your efforts clearly are podcasting.
Without a doubt.
Without a doubt. I'd love some pointers from you on top of that. But with that, what can you tell me about the growth of this? I know there's a lot of people who are kind of hearing that voice is the new medium, and it's kind of taking back over from video, and there's a lot of people interested in starting a podcast from a gaming. But when you're traditionally a medium that's so visual, how are you managed to keep the interest in something that's purely audio? Have you seen that being an issue for you at all? Or what can you tell me about how you kind of dance around creating content for the podcast versus, video?
Well, the thing about video is if you're focusing on that, then people have to be 100% focused on you.
Mhm.
So you had better be damn good. With audio, I can listen to a podcast or read an audiobook while I'm washing the dishes or shoveling a ditch outside around my house or putting siding on my house or going for a run or riding my bike. And that's why I feel like audio is the better way to go, especially if you've seen my face, you know that nobody wants to look at this thing. So I've got this. It's a good thing I've got the voice for it. I think that for the most part, audio is just easier for people to say, I can just throw this on in the background and go on about my day. And every once in a while, I'll be like, oh, that was a good point. Or this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And it doesn't have to be the sole focus. Whereas if I sit down at, and it happens to me all the time, I'll sit down and I'll be watching a YouTube video. Like I tend to watch YouTube videos of the news while I grade my my papers because I'm a school teacher, and I sit down and I'm grading stuff, and then I look up and I'm like, what the heck were they talking about? And I get lost real fast with video. But if I'm listening to something, I don't need the visual to keep going. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. I follow some various online entrepreneur type speaker people to learn more, as everyone does. And one of them, called Gary Vaynerchuk, likes to or has labeled it in a term that I really liked. He calls it passive consumption.
Yeah, he's the wine guy, right?
Yeah, the wine. He's traditionally the wine guy. Yeah, he built Wine Library to incredible acclaim. But then that was his father's company basically. And he broke off, and now he has his own digital media branding company where he's become a personal brand on the side, an author, a speaker, and that.
Oh, okay.
But he's in charge of I think his company is worth like $150 million or something like that. Yeah, he's going for it. Not bad for the wine guy, right?
Not bad for the wine guy.
Yeah, and he made nothing from the wine guy thing. That was all his dad's business. That was just training ground for him. But either way, so he goes into passive media versus active media, and we've been noticing similar things, that people can't really take that really highly spliced content with pop-ups and videos and what the questions written down. Once you get beyond like a 2 or 3 minute video, people their eyes start to fade and they need that passive absorption.
Right. Which is one of the reasons why my YouTube channel was doing so poorly, because my content was long form. For the most part, and long form content on YouTube is not great for the most part.
No, I like the idea that you're using Twitch, namely at this point, to document the process, not necessarily as the content creation vehicle. Well, I mean, it is the vehicle of content creation, but it isn't really the purpose.
Right. I mean, I started out just streaming Twitch games, and I already talked about why.
Yeah.
And over time, that has become less and less where I get to play games, and more where I record the podcast, because, Switchcraft is 3 days a week. And then we've got 78 Degrees, which we record that on Wednesday. Plus all that stuff means that those are days that I can't stream video games. And plus I also have a family and a job, and being able to sit down and play a game on stream is something that I haven't been able to do very much at all lately. I feel a little guilty about that for the people who subscribe or follow me on Twitch, but they don't seem to mind that I've just been doing mostly content creation, mostly just sitting down and talking to them rather than playing a game for them. And I've just been lucky that my audience has allowed it to organically move in the direction that I think that I'm better at anyway, because, spoiler alert, I am really, really bad at video games, but I love to talk about them.
Because you're spending all your time appreciating the environments and things they did to make the game. Yeah, I'm not too dissimilar from that. I really enjoy the RPGs. I like to run around and look at everything and be like, oh, they put so much detail into this world, My buddies are very objective based, so they're always like, Seth, come on, we're going to the point. It's like, no, you're missing it. So I think
Push the
that kinda makes me
payload.
bad. Yeah, exactly. It's nothing that makes me bad at games technically, but I just think we appreciate them deeply.
Yes.
No, that's really interesting though that you've leveraged your strengths. Like you said, you were kind of, or we've discovered, or I'm sure you've known forever, you were kind of born to be the radio guest star, it seems, or the host. So the fact that your podcast has taken off while ironically doing all mediums at the same time, do you think it's because you've put more effort into the podcast specifically, or do you just think your style kind of plays to the podcast environment?
I think it's choice B. It's definitely the latter. Like my skill set, I feel, is much better suited to do a good job on a podcast. Whereas if I am trying to edit video, I'm not good at it. I don't find it interesting for a long period of time. Editing audio is so much faster. And the way that I work with my podcast, I really don't edit very much. I tend to, and that's also, I tend to not edit very much. And the reason why is because I feel like it sounds more authentic. I always wanted the people listening to my show, whether it be Run Jump Stomp or Nintendo Switchcraft or 78 Degrees or my bonus Patreon content or whatever other podcast that I make down the road, I always wanted the audience member to feel like they just happen to be in a room and somebody's talking and they're listening. That's what I always wanted it to feel like. And when you edit out your ums and your uhs and your breaths and your pauses, you kind of take something that feels very organic and make it feel very artificial and robot-like. And yes, I think that at the end of the day, it probably sounds more professional, but it doesn't feel as authentic. And so I've always wanted to kind of steer in that direction. And I'm not sure if my brain is making up these reasons because I'm lazy and I don't want to edit, or if that they're actually true. But either way, editing video is really, really tough, and I'm not great at it. So I try and avoid that as much as possible.
I empathize with you greatly. I would rather edit video, or I mean audio over video any day. I'm mostly a graphics guy, so once you throw in the moving stuff, it all gets a little bit more, Z degree starts being thrown in there. It gets a little more crazier. What can you tell me about this journey that you've been taking over the last 2.5 years roughly with the explosion of this viewership? This is, from what it sounds like, this is the largest viewership you've collected on any of your projects. What was that like? Were there growing pains? Was it exciting? Did things almost go down one day and you saved it by a hair's breadth? Tell me about that journey.
It's been slow and steady, really. It really has. If you look at the graph for my podcast downloads per month, it's just very, very slowly going up a little bit each and every week. And I'm happy with that. Of course, I would be happier if it looked like a hockey stick and went up real quick, but that's not going to happen. And I'm okay with that. Maybe after I'm on this show, it'll go up a bunch, but I'm really just happy to have an outlet, because I don't want to have to bother my wife with this stuff, because she doesn't care about this video game or that video game. Yeah. She'll listen and she'll be like, "Oh, that's nice, honey." But she doesn't really give a crap about that stuff. That's not in her. That's like when she comes and tells me about sewing, because she loves to sew. But as soon as she starts talking to me about it, my eyes glaze over. And, I'm an adult. I've got kids. My friends are adults. They've got kids. We really don't get to hang out as much as we used to be able to. So this gave me a way to sit down and just kind of get my thoughts out and have fun with it. And the growth has been really, really slow and steady. And I think that's why it's where it is now, is because of slow and steady growth. There was a huge spike once, and it went way up, and then it just went right back to where it was. And I don't know what the hell that was. But I think it was like one episode was downloaded 40,000 times. And I was like, what the hell is happening here?
Wow.
And then it just went away. So I don't know what that was, but for the most part, every month about 50,000 is what we're at now. And, you know, that's been consistently growing every time. And it's exciting. It's really exciting because I'll go tell my wife, I'll like, honey, like right now, we're at I switched podcast providers. I used to use, I can't remember what the heck it's called. I used to use Squarespace. And not that there's anything wrong with Squarespace. I just felt like they weren't focused on podcasting. So I switched to Fireside. I switched to Fireside back in, I think it was February. And right now I'm looking at it. Since I switched over, I'm at 392,000 downloads since I switched over to Fireside. There were more before then. So now we're here, but like I'm quickly approaching 400,000 and that's awesome. And, you know, by in 6 months, well, probably less than 6 months time, if things keep going the way they will, we'll be at 500,000 downloads, which is the most insane thing that I think I've ever said.
That's got to give you a little swagger in front of your class, right? Like, do you have a gaming podcast that's approaching 500,000 downloads?
Oh, I don't tell my students about.
They don't know.
Secret. No, I don't. I don't tell them.
I will find out your school and put posters up now.
Yeah, please don't. I don't want to have, because the class would get completely out of hand. Like the kids would be distracted.
Yeah,
I think.
Sure.
Or well, most of them, a majority of them would just say, "Really? That's lame." And then because they're teenagers and their job is to be the least impressed person in the room.
Yeah,
always. That is their job. A couple of them would think it's insane and awesome.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be able to teach them anything about science for the rest of the year because it would be constantly like, hey, do you play this? Or what do you think of this game? And I'd be like, oh, we got to work on this other stuff now. So I don't talk about my podcast at work. Plus, most of the adults that I work with think that video games are lame and for kids. And I just don't want to deal with the stigma with it. It's not like I'm ashamed of it, but I just don't advertise it.
Yeah, no, I can understand why you would feel that way. I actually have a question for you. I didn't realize at first when I was doing my research on you that you were a teacher, but I noticed some of your original VODs that you were uploading, you were live streaming Minecraft. Is that right? Did you ever play Minecraft with your students?
No. I'm very, very laser focused on content when I'm at work. I stopped streaming Minecraft because it brought in the wrong crowd. Not the people who like Minecraft are bad people, but it brings in a lot of younger people, like a lot of younger people. And I spend all day with younger people, and I wanted to spend my time with people who are older instead. So I ended up not like, even though I like Minecraft a lot, I decided I wasn't going to stream it anymore. Same thing with Pokemon. Like I had never played a Pokemon game before. So I figured, I'll try out a Pokemon game and I'll stream it. Yeah, and I was having fun, but like it was just kept bringing in these kids that were like, hey, shout me out, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, you guys need to chill because kids are just a little too excitable. So I stopped streaming anything that I thought that kids would get really excited for.
Interesting. Yeah, that kind of parlayed into my next question a little bit is about do you find that different topics impact your audience differently? And
definitely.
It sounds like you're really veering away from what seems as more youthful, structured games to avoid that kind of viewership. What else can you tell me about the type of content you pick and maybe how it does and doesn't react with your community very well?
I have, for the most part, avoided playing MOBAs. For those of you that don't know what a MOBA is, it's a multiplayer online battle arena, kind of like League of Legends or Dota or Heroes of the Storm or Smite. And while I really, really, really like those kinds of games, because I think they're incredibly fun, and if you're playing with the right team, you can really get a great sense of accomplishment. I don't like streaming those kinds of games because the toxic community that tends to come with it. And I feel like I've been really, really careful and selective about the community that I build around my channel. So if people come in and they seem even just a little bit like a jerk, I ban them instantly. I don't like, if that means that less people are going to watch me, I'm much more happy to have less people watch me than have a jerk show up and ruin everybody else's time. So I'm real quick to ban people. And that means that I tend to not play games that are super competitive, games like the MOBAs or something like that, just so that I can avoid the community that tends to come with it. And that's not to say that everybody that likes those games is a toxic jerk, because I like those games and I don't think I'm a toxic jerk. I just think that the toxic jerks tend to flock towards certain styles of games, so I avoid them.
Have you ever seen the series Video Game High School?
No.
In Video Game High School, they have every single category of game broken down to basically like classes, and people study them together. And the real-time strategy MOBA type people are all just a bunch of jerks. It's kind of funny how they pulled that out. But they're more like the business jerk, little twist to it.
Yeah.
So I think you're empathized with and understanding. One of the reasons I won't play League of Legends well as much as I will other games is because of the rage. Like, there's so many variations in items and so many changes that it's really hard to keep up specifically with the small details, and the reactions you get in game are just vitriol.
Oh yes, I mean, if there are a lot of people out there who think that you need to pick one game and that's the game you play, and you need to know everything about that game, and if you don't know something about that game, then you shouldn't play this game. And I describe myself as a filthy casual. I don't care if I win. Like, I just am there to have fun. Like, I played World of Warcraft for years.
Me too.
And I was always like, and I raided, and we were never the best raid team. We never did hardcore raiding. We were just like, we were happy to just jump in, try and overcome something together as a team. And I always personally said that for me, because those games are very, very loot focused, my perfect game would be an MMO that had no levels and no loot. So you just go into a dungeon and try and overcome a challenge together. It doesn't matter what gear you're wearing. It doesn't matter what level you are. You're just trying to accomplish something with a team of friends. And I always think that that's much more fun than getting a shiny whiz-bang thing at the end. And I know for a fact that I am in the very, very small minority there.
I was about to say, you're such a purist. You play for the love of the game. You got to Twitch play with you, and you don't like MMORPGs because of the loot systems.
I know, it's so.
I can see that. It's for the game. I remember hearing one of the CEOs or president of Blizzard talking about the success was basically because they controlled vanity, and they included this type of gear system so they could get people to be a little obsessive about the gear structure, which does create, one of the, I mean, religious or not, one of the sins. So it's kind of interesting that that's the core of the system, and you inherently were just like, I'd replace that part.
Yeah, I would get rid of that instantly. But there's also a lot of people that love that. Like, they like to have a goal at the end. They like to look at that and say, if I do this 58 times, I'll get that thing. And then I can do another thing 58 times to get the next thing. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. It's just, for me, that doesn't work, because at the end of the day, I don't care about the thing. I just care about the moment-to-moment gameplay. It drives my son crazy because a new skin on Fortnite will come out, and he'll be like, Dad, come look at this new skin. And I'll look and I'll be like, yeah, that's cool. And he'll go, are you going to get it? And I'm like, no, I'm not spending money on that. And he goes, why not? I always tell him, I go, because I don't care about the skins. And he says, why do you get the battle pass? I say, I get the battle pass because I like doing the challenges. I like to go and find all of the golf, hit the golf ball in all of the cups, or to shoot all of the hoops, or to, drive a golf cart through 10 fiery hoops. Like, that's what I got the battle pass for. Not because I cared about the skins. And it drives him crazy because on Fortnite, I always have all of my skins are always random. Everything's random. And he's like, how come you're using that skin? I was like, because it's what came up this time. And he just can't fathom that I don't care.
Yeah. I'm always one that won't go get all of them. My dad was always like, don't buy it, wait till 3 weeks later. If you still want it, go get it, kind of deal. So I've always convinced myself not to do it. But there's always that one skin you have to have. Right? Like, if there was like a Mario or Luigi skin, you'd be like, got it.
Maybe. I don't know, because I'd still leave it on random.
Fair. I had a friend that was said the same stuff as you, and he's a real botanist. He likes to grow plants and stuff. And so one day a skin came out, that vine guy, and he's just nothing but a plant, and his axe is a plant. So sure enough, he shelled out the money.
There you go.
One thing. So I got a question about the podcasting stuff again. You grew over a bit. There's a couple years going through and a lot of growth. What was were there anything that was a particular learning experience along the way? Anything that kind of shocked you about how to run a podcast that may not be your first impression?
No, I don't know. Nothing jumps out at me. That's the most uninteresting answer, I guess. But I don't think that I have an answer to that question. Unfortunately,
so there wouldn't really.
It's exactly. Go ahead.
So there wouldn't really be any common mistakes or pitfalls, maybe.
Oh yes, without a doubt. Yeah. There's tons of mistakes that I made, like the fact that, doing a podcast and maybe if I hope Squarespace isn't one of your sponsors or anything, but I started my podcast with Squarespace. And I think Squarespace is fantastic if you want to make a good website. Beautiful. It's gorgeous. They make fantastic websites, but their podcasting tools are terrible. And it was really, really frustrating. And I really wish that I never had gone with them. I had this weird, because their analytics are terrible. Finding out how many people have downloaded your episode is just about impossible. So I ended up feeding my Squarespace feed through something called PodTrack in order to see how many people were downloading the show. And once Squarespace made some kind of change that broke that, I was like, nope, I'm out. I got to find somebody else. The most important thing, we already talked about how I couldn't make up my mind between Twitch and YouTube. But the most important thing about podcasting is you absolutely 100%, without a doubt, there's nothing more important than this. You have to be consistent. You have to show up and you have to put out an episode when you say you're going to put out an episode. And you have to have that consistency over a long period of time before an audience is going to show up. The thing that I would say, if anybody out there is thinking about doing a podcast, you need to be okay talking to yourself and having nobody listen to it for a very long time before anybody's going to pick it up. I got lucky. And I think that, it's Libsyn. They're big into podcasting, and they said that I think that they said that if you have 1,000 downloads an episode, then you are in the top 5% of podcasting, because so many podcasts have 2 downloads an episode. And if you find that frustrating, then I would say you don't want to do this, because it is an uphill battle. Definitely 100% an uphill battle, and one that you're not likely to win. And even though I'm really happy with the growth that I've had and the crazy numbers of downloads that I've had so far, I'm very, very happy with that. But if I didn't have that, I'd still do it because I find it fun. If you only want to do it because you think it's a means to an end, then it's not going to be fun for you, and you're just going to burn yourself out, because it is a lot of work.
You literally just took my exact next question. You're such a good teacher. I'm sure you make these tests all the time. With that, though, what you said, first off, I don't think you got lucky at all. You said that RunJumpStomp was almost 100 episodes. You've done 264 of Switchcraft, and I know you've created content of other types, not to mention the untold volumes that you've created for your course. It sounds like you really did do your number one thing. You were consistent, and you did it for years. So you have the fruits of your effort, it seems. So I don't know if luck does you justice enough in that explanation. But
fair enough.
I'm really, really impressed with what you've been able to put together over the time, considering it is a passion for you, really, on the side. But it seems that this has really impacted you in a great deal, both as an outlet for your interests, creative, professional, whatever you want to talk about. But has it impacted your family in a similar way. You're very unique in that you are a father who creates this stuff on the side in the video game sector. What can kind of you tell me about that dynamic and a little bit how you navigate that field?
Well, doing this really doesn't interfere too much with what I have to do as a dad, because first off, my son and I both really, really like video games. My daughter doesn't care about video games at all. My niece, who also lives with us, she doesn't really care about, she's not against them, but she's like, she doesn't crave playing video games. My son and I, though, we adore video games, and he and I talk about video games a lot. And like I said earlier on in the show, when I come home from work, I sit down, and this is the time when he's working on his homework anyway. Although usually I'd be done by now. So he's busy doing something else. So I'm just kind of doing my thing upstairs. And then when I'm done, I just put my lights away, and we go on about the rest of our day, which is usually a ridiculous number of other things that we have to accomplish because it's very busy around here. I wouldn't say that podcasting has really affected my family life at all. I will say this, that my wife is incredibly understanding about the time that I do have to put into it. There's something that I've got coming up I can't talk about yet because it's not 100% for certain. Waiting to hear back from somebody. But I'm 99% sure that I'm going to be working on something with one of my favorite podcasters of all time. And that's going to be incredibly busy for me for the next 13 or so weeks. And when I showed my wife, she was like, "That's awesome. I'm going to understand when you have things that you have to do," because she's just friggin' great. My wife is awesome. So my family's just been really cool about it. And look at the room that I'm sitting in here. I used to record in her sewing room, and we ended up building this. Yes, it's my podcasting studio. Yes, it's my streaming studio, but it's also a a place to go play video games. Not many guys would be lucky enough to have a spot where they can put all of their crap. And my wife is really cool about that.
Yes, I am very fortunate not to be married yet. However, I have married brothers and friends, and they all kind of have the same story. I've got one friend who plays World of Warcraft and League of Legends and Overwatch with me, and he says that they have one spare bedroom, and it's his wife's spare bedroom, done up on all the pretty pink stuff that you can imagine a girl would decorate a spare bedroom. And he has like the desk in the corner that he puts his laptop up on, and that's all he's allowed. So he sees these chairs, he's like, "I wish I could get that chair." So I can only imagine.
But that chair's not pretty.
I could get her a pink one. I've offered.
I suppose.
At least you could get the feeling out of it. So that's incredible that you have such an understanding wife. Was she always like this with you? Or is this kind of just she saw this passion in you and she kind of eventually gave in?
She knew I was a giant nerd from day one. She knew. She saw it written on my face. I'm unabashedly and unashamedly, I am a giant nerd, and I'm totally okay with that. And it was not a shock to her that I would do something like this.
Well, it's a shock to probably most married men that she'd let you do something like that with the room. So you're inspirational to all of us. Hope we can get as lucky. Fortunately for me, it's part of my job as well. So to have the gamer stuff, I got that loophole I integrated. But that's
it doesn't hurt that from time to time we have a little bit extra money to go and do something because of it, or it doesn't hurt that from time to time I get a game for free from a developer because of this. So that's money I didn't have to spend. That's definitely an advantage to doing a video gaming podcast, is that every once in a while video game developers will send me a free game. Not Nintendo yet. That'd be great, but Nintendo doesn't.
One day you're getting there. I mean, at your views, I wouldn't be surprised if you're just on the cusp of something like that.
Nintendo does not care about podcasting.
Don't they have their own podcast now?
They do, but what they care about are your YouTube views, your Twitter followers, and things like that. You could have 1 million people on YouTube, and they'd be, or I'm sorry, on a podcast, and they'd be like, "Yeah, but what about YouTube?" That's really where their minds are, on social media and YouTube. So,
I have a
look.
I have a feeling
if you want people to if you want to help me out, everybody follow me on social media, and maybe I can get some free games from Nintendo.
Please, definitely, you've earned it. I think the I can understand why maybe, but I feel that the traditional concepts around that are going to shift as once the smart assistants start to take over a little bit. As we move more and more into this passive media absorption, like you've noticed with podcasting, how it's kind of the new age of radio. Eventually they'll catch on, but big brands are always slow, so you'll have better results probably with small indie studios, I imagine. Peripherals.
Oh, definitely.
Like
well, at the same time, in Nintendo's defense, it's much easier to track they understand what happens when they look at a YouTube channel and it has that many listeners or that many views. They know that many people have looked at it. When I say that, last month 50,000 people downloaded the last month 50,000 downloads of an episode. Well, to be perfectly honest and perfectly transparent,
good point.
I download all kinds of podcasts that I don't listen to. Like I subscribe to 20 or 30 podcasts. I don't have time for all of them. They download every week, and every week I look and I say, I'll listen to this one, not this one this week. I'll listen to this one, not this one this week. And that's just the way it goes. So having 50,000 downloads is very, very different than having 50,000 views on YouTube.
It feels very similar to when people try to throw out their engagement numbers for Twitch chat. Have you seen this new tool kind of that comes around where people will be claiming their exposure rates through being represented in Twitch chat? So they'll basically have a bot that sends out a brand mention every couple of minutes, and they do this calculation that out of everybody that's in chat, something was said, assuming X amount of the percentage of people read it, it should be the equivalent of this amount of impressions. But it's all just fuzzy math. There's no actual gauge. You should be able to determine the average viewership of one of your episodes, you'd hope. Maybe, or you'd be able to determine the average, the amount of minutes done, or whatever it is specifically, but they're all just fuzzy kind of guessing through averages. How do you even get that data?
You can through Apple. Apple has exactly how many minutes people have listened to my show, exactly when. It was funny because I was looking at the graph and I saw a huge drop in what the hell did I say at this point? Did I say something awful? No, I said I'm about to spoil something, so don't listen. And everybody stopped listening. Oh no! Because there was a graph, and then right there was the audio. I could listen to what I said at exactly that point. The only problem is not everybody's on Apple. So if you're downloading my show and it's not on Apple, I can't see that stuff. So those numbers that Apple gives, while they're nice, you can't really do anything with them because it's leaving out more than half your audience most of the time.
Out of that, actually, on the ways that you distribute your podcast, there is Apple and iTunes and Google Play and all these different locations. Where's your favorites to distribute?
It doesn't matter to me. Wherever a listener wants to listen to it. I've had people reach out and they say, "Hey, can you put your show on Spotify?" So I did. "Hey, can you put your show on this?" So I did. I don't care where people listen as long as they're listening. Most of them automatically get their feeds from Apple anyway. So if you upload to Apple, you're automatically going to start showing up in Pocket Cast and Overcast and all those other ones, because they just troll Apple's feed and grab that stuff. There's only a few that you have to submit separately to.
Interesting. I didn't realize that they pirated in that way.
I don't think it's pirating. I think it's allowed.
Just redistribution, I guess. Just like when you passed it through your tracking software. I guess it's just a relay in the node, I guess. That's pretty interesting.
Well, because all that Apple does is give people a link to your RSS feed. So, for instance, once if let's say I open up Apple Podcasts and I search for the OPSEAT whatever thing, what's the title of the show? OPSEAT podcast.
OPSEAT podcast. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. If I search for the OPSEAT podcast and I hit subscribe, All that does is grab the RSS feed from your server and give it to my device, and then Apple stays out of it for the rest of it.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, they wouldn't even have to ping through because they would be able to just go original feed. I see.
Right.
They just
as soon as my device has your feed,
mm-hmm.
it just continually will check that feed. It doesn't matter what Apple does in the meantime. It's just there as almost like a discovery tool.
Interesting. What would you think is your favorite thing about the podcasting community?
Oh, how cordial people don't think of, at least this is how I look at it. And I think that a lot of the other Nintendo podcasts that I've worked with before, I think that they probably feel the same way. At least I'd like to think that they do. And that's that I don't think of them as competition. I think of them as comrades. So like you mentioned N64 Josh,
mm-hmm.
who I've been on his show. He's been on my show. He mentioned me to you.
Mm-hmm.
He was the one who pointed out OPSEATs to me. I'd never heard of OPSEATs until he mentioned them. And I was like, oh man, I got to check that out. That looks like a good chair. Cause I had like a kind of a crappy chair.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've been on Nintendo Pulse with them, and they've been on my show. I've, had guests on from a lot of different Nintendo podcasts, and I've been on all over the place as well. And the one thing that I will say about all of them is that every single person that I've talked to has been incredibly pleasant and really enjoyable to talk to. I'm certain it helps that we all have this one thing in common, that we love to talk about Nintendo stuff. But they've also all been really cool. And it's, I know that Josh, his podcast, it's higher than mine on Apple Podcasts, and I don't have any animosity towards him for that. I applaud him because he puts in a lot of work for it, and I think he does a great job. And just like my podcast tends, like if you search for Nintendo, it'll come up higher than Nintendo Pulse sometimes. And I don't think that Lloyd, who is one of the hosts, Lloyd and Steven, I don't think that they have any animosity toward me when I'm higher than them. We all kind of look at each other and say a rising tide brings all boats up, mm-hmm. or however that phrase goes.
Yeah.
And, we all think of each other as not competition, but more like, look, we're all working on this stuff together. Even when we're not working together, we're kind of working together.
I love the sense of community and camaraderie across the people that create. Are there any events, mm-hmm. Physical things that people could go to types of people, or have you had an opportunity to meet any of them in person?
I live so far away from everything. There's no chance that will ever happen.
Yeah.
I live in the middle of nowhere. Literally. It is like, if you think you found the middle of nowhere, you got to go at least another 100 miles and then you'll find it. It's way out in the middle of nowhere. And as a teacher, I can't take the time off that I would need to in order to go to PAX or E3 or any of these things, because they all happen during the school year. So I don't get to go to these things, and that's less than optimal for me. But what are you going to do? I get to watch from afar and not have to stand in line, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, you keep it up, and people are going to start asking you to come see them at increasing rates. I'm sure people already do on occasion.
Well, while that would be wonderful, again, I'm a teacher, so that's my first job. That's always my first job.
Hey, I've seen the community pay for trips for people to come see them before. I've seen some Twitch streamers actually pay for their favorite streamer to come meet them at an event before, pay for the plane ticket and stuff. It's pretty interesting what people will do these days. Yeah.
It is. Like, I've got a Patreon, and people support me on the Patreon, and every time I get a new patron, I'm like, I'll stick my head in the room. I'm like, honey, I got a new patron. And she'll be like, why? I go, I don't know, but they like my stuff, I guess. Because I give it all away for free.
Well, you heard it, everyone. Go over to the Patreon and go donate and be a part of this community. Definitely deserving. Bill, I could talk to you all day. I feel you're a very personable guy. I like why you do what you're doing. I'm tickled that you're a teacher. I have a teacher's mentality myself. And I really wish you the best of luck in what you're doing into the future. And I can't wait to see you cross that 500 and even the 1 million mark. I hope.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, I hope we can talk again sometime. Maybe come over to your podcast and chat if there's ever anything relevant that you'd like to talk with.
Definitely.
I'd love to be a part in whatever way we can. But before we wrap up today, we typically have a soft question at the end of all the interviews. But it comes into play because you are a gamer and you are a technical gamer as yourself. In this field, a lot of people have really strong feelings about the items that they use. We have so many pieces of our rig and so many of the little pieces of tech that go together to help us do what we do. For whatever reason, people typically have a disproportionate feelings about one item. Their favorite pair of headphones, their favorite mouse, their favorite keyboard, something that they just swear up and down by. What's your favorite peripheral?
Oh, that's tough. I'd have to say, it's really tough. I'd have to say my microphone. I mean, I'm a podcaster, so the microphone is the most important piece of equipment that I have. Yeah. And it was expensive. You know, when I told my wife how much it was going to cost, her eyes got big. But I feel like it was worth it. And every time I record a show and I listen and I'm like, okay, that was a good investment because I feel like I always really, really thought it was important to have high quality sound. And I think I've got a Heil PR40 for a microphone, and I bet you can probably do everything that I do with less than a Heil PR40. But damn, this microphone is really nice.
Well, I mean, just listening, I don't know if you sound like this when you're physically sitting next to you, but you sound like a radio host. It does you justice for sure.
It's a studio quality microphone. I think like this is the kind of microphone that Tom Merritt uses, Leo Laporte uses, Scott Johnson uses. Like this is a very, very nice microphone. And luckily I was able to, when people tip me on Twitch or they subscribe on Twitch or they throw money at me on Patreon, I just squirrel that money away. And when I get enough, then I buy a piece of equipment to upgrade my setup. And this was the big one. This one, because this setup, this microphone comes with the boom arm and stuff, is like $400. But in the end, at the end of the day, when you're doing an audio podcast, I think it's really important to have a really, really good microphone.
Absolutely. I mean, you could say a 4K camera to a YouTuber is just as... Yeah,
without a doubt.
Very interesting. Well, we'll link that into the description so people can go take a look and hopefully they can sound half as good as you. Well, thank you again. That's all that I really have for you today. Would you like to say anything to any of our guys still watching? Plug your channel or where they can come find you?
You can find me at RunJumpStomp.com or any of the social media networks. Just RunJumpStomp. I'm sure that you'll come across it. Please make sure that you check out Nintendo Switchcraft, subscribe to it, and check out 78 Degrees, my brand new podcast. Last episode, we talked about nuclear war and pink balloons. And if you want to know why we were talking about that, then you'll just have to listen.
Well, I think you just got one more listener. I got to go. Thank you.
You cut out at the end. You got a what?
So you've definitely just got one more listener. I've definitely got to come over and figure out the connection between those two things.
There you go. Awesome.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. You take care, and I'll be in touch with you.
All right. Thanks. Have a good one.
You too.